In the early 50s, ABC had an experimental program called Stars of Jazz. It was hosted by Bobby Troup and produced by Jimmy Baker. It was a real step forward for music. And they'd have all different groups on different weeks, and very, very interesting. I was on quite a few of them with the Lighthouse All-Stars, with Frank Rossellino, Conte Candoli, Victor Feldman, Howard Rumsey, and quite a few of the guys. And this is the one record that's left of those times, how we looked, how we played, and they're to be commended for doing this experimental type of show. And it was a pretty big hit in LA, and we really appreciated them doing it.
To the list of names of men who've been outstanding in promoting of jazz and fostering its goodwill, Duke Ellington, Leonard Feather, George Simon, Steve Allen, Chicago's Frank Holstein, Eddie Condon, and many more, you can now add another, the name of Howard Rumsey. When Rumsey's Lighthouse All-Stars first started functioning in 1950, the stock of modern jazz on the West Coast was at its lowest ebb. In fact, Howard's very first task was to convince the people of Hermosa Beach that his musicians didn't constitute a menace to society. Now, 9 years later, the All-Stars are among the civic leaders of the once reluctant beach town. Their stock has risen to the point where today many of the men are members of the various citizens' organizations in the area. Now, each is called upon from time to time to address group gatherings of Hermosians. And Howard himself has even written a column for the local paper. Well, needless to say, what's been good for Howard Rumsey's place of business has been good for jazz on the West Coast in general.
I'd like to explain what the Lighthouse was. It was an experimental place. Howard Rumsey had been there for many years prior to my getting there, and he had mostly the guys from the Kenton band, like Milt Bernhardt, Shorty Rogers, people like that. When I went in, we had me, myself, Howard, Claude Williamson, Frank Rossellino, Conte Candoli, and Bob Cooper. That's a pretty good band. Also Bud Shank.
Actually, we worked together as sidemen in Vito Musso's band before the original Kenton band, but it didn't take long for Stan to have his own band, and it was my privilege to work with him at the Rendezvous Ballroom in Balboa in 1941, which was actually the very first band. And Jimmy Lyons was able to put a wire in there, so we started doing transcontinental broadcasts on Saturday afternoons, and the next thing you know, we were headed toward the Palladium in Hollywood, and actually it was the week before Pearl Harbor, so the second week we worked there, we were in blackouts, and we finished the engagement playing in blackouts, but the start of World War II shook up the entire big band picture, and it was interesting to me to see that a lot of great band leaders went into the service and had their own military bands, Navy, Coast Guard, Marines, everything. And unfortunately, the original band was broken up by the draft. And so I went back down to Hermosa Beach, where I had enjoyed working back in the late 30s at the Hut Ballroom. And I took a look around town, and I remember, of course, that Zuka's was there, and that was a place that was operated by the Zucker brothers, and during the big band period, he had a reputation for hiring the best bands of the time. And when I got back to Hermosa, Zucker's was gone, and the only place in town that had a bandstand that was suitable for some kind of performance was the Lighthouse. So I went in there and met John Levey, and he had found a difficult approach in Hermosa Beach because of the fact that he was an outsider coming into a small town, and he was from Chicago, and he was considered an outsider, and he was looking for a way out. And I just happened to hit him at the right time by saying that I thought a Sunday concert would be the thing. And he replied that he thought Sunday was the worst day of the week for the liquor business. But I came back at him by saying, well, what could you lose? You don't have any business now. So sure enough, we tried it, and it showed promise because there were more people in there. On Sunday afternoon, we started on May 29th, 1949. And eventually, it worked into a 5-night-a-week job with twice on Sunday, so that gave us a 6-night-a-week job.
Not very many people know that I was a member of the Lighthouse All-Stars before they got famous. In the summer of '51, I worked down there on the Sunday afternoon sessions. And it was really a trip. The place was packed every Sunday with all these people right off the beach. They're dripping sand and sweat all over the place, and the band was up there playing hot. And see who was there? Shorty Rogers was there, and Jimmy Jufrey. That was before a lot of guys left Kenton's band and went to work down there. But that was fun. Then later on, after I left Kenton's band, during one summer, I played the off nights, the Monday and Tuesday down there with a group of my own. And so I have a certain connection with the place, although I wasn't one of the famous all-stars.
The Lighthouse, I was there many times, and every time was a memorable experience. I mean, Howard Rumsey did a great job of organizing things and played bass on the band, and I think that was the first time that I met, when Stan Levey was not playing drums over there, I met Max Roach, who eventually went back to the Apple and played most of his concerts and club appearances on the East Coast as opposed to the West.
At the end of one of the big tours that we had with Nat Cole and Sarah Vaughan and Dizzy, it was called The Big Show, the band came to LA and we played our last date. And the band was going to break up for about 2 weeks at that time. When I reached the LA airport, they were paging me in the airport. I said, oh my God, what happened, you know? And I went to the red phone, picked it up, and it was Max Roach, my old friend from New York. He says, Stan. I said, yeah, Max, what's going on? He says, look, I'm working at the Lighthouse. You got to get me out of here. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I have a 6-month contract with Howard Rumsey, and they won't let me leave unless I get a suitable replacement. And you're the guy. They said they'll settle on you. So I never went into LA. I got a cab, went right to the Lighthouse in Hermosa Beach, and started talking with Max and Howard and the owner, John Levey. And we settled on a price. And the next day, Max was gone, and I started, and I lived right at the beach. That was the beginning of a good, long relationship with Howard and the Lighthouse.
The drum chair, of course, was the most important chair in my mind. I was convinced at that time that no matter what group you presented, it only swung as much as the drummer did. So I felt that was what I should concentrate on. And in the 10 years that I was on that stand, the drum chair went from Carl Kiffey to Ramo Bailey to Larry Bunker to Shelly Man to Stan Levey, no, to Max Roach, and then Stan Levey, and the final drummer was Nick Martinez. The 5 years that I spent on the stand with Stan Levey were the best 5 years of the period. And when I think back about it, I understand that I really didn't need to worry when I had Stan, because he knew all the best players and he knew the right guys. And in essence, it was really Stan contracting the band. There were no real contracts. That was the best part about the job. Guys could come and go, and they did. Stan brought in Conti and Richie Kamuka and players from the Kenton organization, which we found to be very dependable and musicians of a professional standard that were really great.
When I first came on the group, I had left Kenton with that ponderous band. Boom! I was like a weightlifter, you know? And I get with a 5-piece group and I was playing like a jackhammer. And you worked through that. You knew that I was playing too loud, I didn't have the flexibility at that time. And you saw that I would work through it, and I appreciate that. One of the nicest guys and one of the best players that we ever had was Bob Cooper. Tremendous player.
Yes, indeed.
And the nicest, you wouldn't want to meet a human being like that. You don't think he's real. He was so nice.
That's true. You know that he wrote all the music for that concert we did at Royce Hall.
I know that.
And that was called, came out in an album called Jazz Rolls Royce.
Mm-hmm.
And
I did the cover.
That's right.
Yeah.
And on top of that, that was a 6-piece group and with a 10 men added.
Absolutely.
And the strangest thing about that, it's listed in the archives as one of the concerts at Royce Hall.
Really?
And but the music was never performed again. And there's a chance that it will be performed once again now in the future, and I would sure like that. And talking about stalwarts, Bud Shank did a big job.
Tremendous player. Flute player, alto, Coop with the oboe and the tenor.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah, and remember the oboe and flute duets?
Wonderful. Wonderful. What a relief. I mean, not a relief, but a left-hand turn.
Yeah.
Opposed to the other instrument. It was great.
Yeah, I love that sound. And then, of course, we had other great players. I'm sorry to say that thinking about the overall picture of the 10 years, Milt Bernhardt was a member of the group.
Original.
Yeah. And Mulligan was a guest player on Sundays. And Jerry, when he first came to Los Angeles and came down to Lighthouse and played an afternoon set, was playing on a borrowed baritone saxophone.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, so yeah, it was the start of a great period,
Sure.
and everybody was getting their feet down.
It was a launching pad. Yeah.
Yeah, and we had many great piano players like Claude Williamson and Sonny Clark.
Wonderful.
Wow, and Hamp Hawes, you know. Oh, there and Lou Levy.
Lou, yes.
Yeah. So, in one Sunday afternoon, over the period, the afternoon and evening, I got to play with 3 great piano players. It was Claude, Lou Levy, and Hamp Hawes.
Not bad.
And I thought to myself, how many bass players ever get to work with 3 guys like that in one day? And they were all saying their thing, and it was all beautiful, but they were different from each other. and it was a great experience for me.
I'm sure it was.
So all in all, we could talk about the personnel and the different players. There were so many of them, you know, and a lot of people, like for instance Teddy Edwards, who actually worked there before I started calling the group the Lighthouse All-Stars. When interviewed in recent years, would say, I was in the first Lighthouse All-Star group.
Yeah. He put himself in there.
Well, so that's a great compliment.
Oh, sure.
One of the best musical experiences I ever had was when Bob Cooper used to call me to come out and take his place at the Lighthouse when he had to go out and do different concerts. That band was really about as strong as they came. Of course, my good friend Stan Levey was playing drums, and he was one of those ironclad timekeepers. Everybody could fall apart, but Stan would stay steady as they came. And in the band also was Victor Feldman, who was one of my all-time favorite musicians. I don't care what instrument he played, vibes or piano. He was it. He was the ultimate. Frank Rossellino, of course. Howard Rumsey, of course, on bass. And I'm trying to think, I think that was it. I think 5 guys. Trumpet. I don't think there was a trumpet player when I was working there. I don't believe there was. However, Dizzy Gillespie came in one day and sat in with us. And whoo, what a time that was. He and Stan were hugging. And I just couldn't believe that I was sitting right next to Diz with Stan Levey in the back and Victor Feldman playing piano and Frank Rossellino. It was beyond any kind of a high you could possibly have, musically speaking. And I played out there for, I say, about 1.5 years on and off, and I got a great musical education listening to all those guys.
We played something called West Coast music. But the ironic part is that all the players, I think except Howard, were from New York or from the East Coast somewhere. So it was just a title they tagged onto us. But we had great customers that came in, all the actors, Lee Marvin, Marlon Brando, I mean, all the actresses, everybody. Liberace came in, he liked jazz, people like that. And the place was packed. Smothers Brothers would come in, and the younger one would get arrested. He'd get drunk, get arrested in Manhattan Beach. And it was just a great place. We did an all-day concert on Sunday from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 2 in the morning, right around the clock. And it was fun. It was just a fun place. And John Levine was a great owner. If you ever needed anything, he was there for you, whatever you needed, you know, money or whatever. Good guy. And just was a ball. Had a great time there. Was there 5 years.
The first day that I ever saw Stan Levey in person was early August 1956. I had just turned 19 the week before, and I had left Houston, Texas to come out to the West Coast to get into the jazz scene out here. I went immediately, upon arriving in LA, I went immediately to the Lighthouse, where Howard Rumsey had a band, Howard Rumsey and the Lighthouse All-Stars, and it was a great band. It consisted of Frank Rossellino on trombone, Bob Cooper on tenor saxophone, the great Sonny Clark, one of the great jazz piano players, on piano, and Stan Levey on drums. And at that time, the Lighthouse, being in Hermosa Beach had a policy where they, on Sundays, would go to this outrageous amount of time from 2 in the afternoon until 2 in the evening. I guess John Levey, the owner, had dictated that that would be great for business, and especially during the summer. So I went in probably mid-afternoon, and they had the guys like Stan and Sonny Clark and all these people, obviously they didn't want to play from 2 until 2, so they had worked out a situation where young players, the better young players on the Southern California jazz scene would come in and sit in to spell them for a bit of time, so they wouldn't have to, like, you know, work the entire 2 to 2 setup. That afternoon, a trio from San Diego came in. I can't remember the bass player's name, but the pianist was Mike Wofford, and the drummer was Johnny Guerin, and they played a set, and they sounded absolutely great. And they were, I think John was younger than I was. He was probably 16 or 17. And Mike Wofford, I think, was my age. And I was terrified because they sounded so great. And I would say, oh man, I'm really in deep water here. I'm going to have to really practice and to get into this. So I didn't speak to Stan at that time, but as the year went on, my playing was very immature then. But I was very serious, and as the year went on, I improved a great deal. And I would go down there, and occasionally I would get to play. And I got a chance to meet Stan and talk to him.
I first met Stan when I was 16 years old in 1956. There was a annual thing at the Lighthouse called the Intercollegiate Jazz Festival. And being from San Diego and still in high school, we talked our way into it representing San Diego State. Later they found out about it, but it was my first week away from home and my first situation in which I could observe that kind of talent as a drummer for 5, 6 nights in a row. San Diego wasn't the mecca of jazz, and occasionally I'd see Buddy Rich. Somebody would come through town with a big band or jazz at the Philharmonic. But what we did was we rented a motel room in Hermosa Beach, where it was the Lighthouse, and Stan was working with Sonny Clark, Howard Rumsey, of course, Frank Rosolino, Conti Condoli, and Bob Cooper. And Stan's wife was out of town. Angela was out of town at that time. And Stan was so beautiful to me. Invited me over to his house, which I think was in Redondo Beach at the time. Spent the night and let me sit in with the Lighthouse All-Stars the last set or so on weeknights, and generally mentored my whole week there. And it was a situation that I'll never forget, and I was so fortunate to have that kind of man give me his time at that time in my life.
All of the young musicians on the scene out here in Los Angeles at that time were in awe of Stan and a little bit intimidated, and there were some reasons for that. One, everybody knew that he had been with the greatest jazz players that ever lived, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. And two, I mean, on the beginning of the modern way to play. And two, he was still, at that time, one of the great jazz drummers. He was making albums in like, For Musicians Only with Dizzy Gillespie, Stan Getz, and Sonny Stitt, which is a classic album now, and many, many other records like that. He was still at the top of his game and playing really well. And then the third thing was his physical appearance, which was very intimidating because he was this big guy, 6'2", something, and everybody knew that he had been a professional fighter, a good one, and had had fights with ranking contenders like Roland Lastarza and people like that. And he looked like he could take you out in 5 seconds or less. And he also had this very gruff exterior, which underneath it was, he wasn't like that. He was, you know, very witty and funny, but you didn't get to know that until you got to know him a little bit.
Stan was always great, and it was great to have Stan in the band because he was like a, you know, big boxer, and he was, nobody ever fooled with the band. We always got paid and everything. Stan never had to do anything. He would just stand in the corner and look, you know, make a face.
I'll tell you a funny story. after I'd gotten to know him a bit, one time I went down there and I told him, I said, yeah, you know, I have this record of you playing with Stan Getz that you made back in the 40s. And it sounds just great, and it's you, Stan Getz, and Al Haig playing the piano. And I said, boy, I really love Al Haig. He's one of my idols. And Stan says, get another one. Typical one-liners, you know, but funny and to the point.
I think my dad actually took me to the Lighthouse in Hermosa Beach to see the All-Stars. And I'm not sure whether he knew that Stan was on drums, and that's the reason he took me, or not. It's not clear to me exactly, but I remember that he was always intrigued by Stan being this big guy, and that he was a boxer. I think that he knew that Stan was a boxer, and that was kind of the thing that he thought was really intriguing. And so I remember watching him that night, and I had kind of. I'd kind of already gotten into Shelley a little bit at that point. And so the West Coast kind of school of jazz, the cool West Coast jazz had kind of come into my consciousness. And I was really into that sound that they were getting. And so I remember that in that club that night, I remember hearing the thing that I remember, the thing that stands out most in my mind is the very same thing that I think about today when I think of Stan Levey. It was this really articulate, beautiful, like airy kind of sound with the time like just right up here in your chin. Just beautiful, and no fooling around, not a lot of chitter chatter in the same way that you would hear other drummers playing with their left hand and stuff, but he had his conversation with the left hand was really, I just remember that it was very articulate and it was very like purposeful. And then the other thing I remember was the pretty way he dropped bombs on the bass drum, and I really always loved that. And today, even when I listen to him play on records that I wasn't even aware of then, the Dizzy stuff and all that, the Dizzy Gillespie stuff, and the great things with Stan Getz and all that. You hear that style, and it's thrilling. I love that. And I'm sure that Stan probably got that from some of the guys that he listened to from I'm not sure, but maybe Kluke, maybe Kenny Clark. I'm not sure who played like that back in those days, or maybe it was Stan that started it. I really don't know, but I just love that style of where they're playing. They're riding, and then suddenly they drop those bombs with the bass drum just in the right spot, and he personified that. His playing personified that to me.
There was so many wonderful people around there at that time, and all the guys that worked there were champions in their own right.
You used to bring in Dizzy, remember?
Oh yeah.
Dizzy to work there, and Lalo Schifrin, all those guys.
That's true.
Charlie Parker.
Yeah, well, Charlie sat in there
right.
About 6 months before he passed away. And that was unusual because he came in with this entourage of about 5 or 6 guys, and they sat right in front of the band, and the waitress went over and said, took their orders, you know, and she asked Charlie, I got this story from the waitress later, he said, I'll have a double 5-star Hennessy. So when she brought the drinks back, she said, that'll be so much. And he said, oh, one of the guys in the band will pay for it. So
that's him.
Yeah, she said, which one? So he went like this. That one.
And they probably did.
Yeah. But then he sat in, and he had that beat-up saxophone with rubber bands, and it was just...
I know it well,
Yeah. And we were, I just called standards every tune, you know, I mean, we played about 4 tunes or 5 tunes, and he never played a solo. He just kind of stood there, you know. And then, because his horn was in bad shape, and nobody offered to give him a loan a horn, so he got off the stand and he went down to the High Seas, which was next door, down the street there. And he went in there, and Sig Galloway was working in there, and he had a brand new tenor. So Charlie said, can I play your horn? And he started playing tenor. So we all went down there and listened to him for an hour. It was really
Why
great.
not?
It was marvelous. And then, unfortunately, Charlie passed away about, maybe 6 months after that. But that was when Max was working there, Max
Right.
Roach.
He came in to see Max, basically.
Yes, he
yeah.
did, yeah. But Max, you know, he worked 6 months on a contract.
I know.
The only player that was ever on a contract.
Yeah. And he called me to take the job because he wanted to open at the Tiffany Club with Clifford Brown.
Yeah, well, that was a well-guarded secret.
Yeah, I know.
And I admired Max for that.
Yeah, Max took care of business.
Sure.
Took care of Max.
Yeah, I had him on all sorts of gigs, as you know. I had him in high school auditoriums at 9:30 in the morning, and I had him at the county fair, wearing a blazer and a straw hat. So,
see that.
but he did his gig
He's
6
a pro.
months.
He's a pro.
Yeah. Then after you came in there, things started to level out, and it started to get into a groove that carried us to the end of the 10-year period. And I love Conti, and to this day, I feel so close to him.
We miss him. We all miss him. Yeah.
One thing about that job that hurt the most was Frank Rosalino. You know,
Oh, terrible story.
he was there 5 years too.
Terrible story.
And he was such a joy in there, and he did everything right. You
He
know?
had the gallows laugh. You know what I mean by that?
Oh.
Constant joke a minute, but underneath was a very, very dark person, which he proved. You know.
Yes, I know. I didn't realize that at the time. I know that he brought a lot of friends. He had a lot of people that loved his playing, and I get a lot of comments about him.
Yep.
And also the fact that there's a scholarship established in his name in the university in Florida.
I didn't know that.
I saw in my time in Los Angeles the original players in the studios were from Paul Whiteman era, followed by the Benny Goodman players, followed by the Kenton players. And so the Lighthouse was just a stepping stone for the great players that came through there to go on and to fulfill their idea of working in the studios and making a nice living and becoming members of the Los Angeles local.
You remember in Pasadena, I think in 1954, Gene Norman put on a big concert. Our group played there and other groups. Then he had the big banner, Battle of the Drummers. And it was Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, Max Roach, and me. And when Buddy Rich got done with us, we all looked like babies in diapers. He just wiped us out completely.
Oh, that was the first time, to my knowledge, that Norman went to that procedure. But then I was excited about it because it was the first time that the All-Stars were invited to play on one of his shows.
Right, right.
And the drum, the Battle of the Drums was very interesting for me because the styles were all different in it, but everyone played great, and it was the high point of the concert that night. So I would say the battle won.
Yeah,
and
Buddy won.
Well,
oh, he did. He did.
Well, Rich was an uncut stone.
Oh, God.
And you know, I could tell you about.
Monster.
I'd like to mention the fact that he actually worked at Concerts by the Sea.
Oh, did he? With the big band? The big band?
Yeah,
Quite a band, huh?
in the late 70s, yeah. And it was sold out.
Howard was a wide open guy. He would allow you to do whatever you felt you could do within reason. If he didn't like it, he would tell you, of course. But it was a very good place to work out your music. If you wrote something, you could bring it in. They would always play it. And if it sounded good, it would go into the book. And a lot of us did record dates during the day or in the evening. He would let you off to do that. Never a problem. The pay was real good for in town. And you were able to make a very good living, which I did. And Howard really is to be commended because he went on from there to Concerts by the Sea, which was a product of his imagination. And that was brought in all the name acts, all the singers and bands and everything. He's retired now, but he did a fabulous job, helped a lot of people,